The Western parties are particularly hypocritical. They play mute when there's a need to provide a frank assessment about what is transpiring with the Palestinians.
Colleagues, 3 weeks from today, we will make a grim milestone, 1 year since Hamas's barbaric October 7th attack. 1 year since 1,200 citizens from Israel and many other countries were massacred.
Our Western colleagues are zealously engaged in the PR for the Ukrainian president who has overstayed his term. I hope you understand how hypocritical your words will sound today under such circumstances.
It bears repeating that it is manifestly in the interest of Israelis, Palestinians, and civilians in every country in the region for this desperation and this devastation to end, for there to be a ceasefire.
Mr. President, let us not mislead anybody. Given the ongoing military operation of Israel, which has been ongoing for more than 11 months, where the U.S. is a sponsor, the adequate delivery of assistance to the population of the Strip is simply not possible.
We urge all council members with influence over Hamas to join others in pressing its leaders to stop stalling, make these compromises, and accept the deal without delay. Lives depend on it. The future depends on it. Colleagues, we remain committed to a two-state solution that will allow Israelis and Palestinians to live side by side in peace and security.
Mr. President, we thank the Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza, Madam Sigrid Kaag, as well as the Executive Director of UNOPS, Mr. Moreira da Silva, for their briefings on the situation in the Strip and their efforts to ensure humanitarian access to its territory as part of the implementation of Security Council Resolution 2720. Unfortunately, as we warned, without a full-fledged ceasefire in Gaza, this document has essentially remained dead letter. Today's statement of the senior coordinator on the whole confirms this, although we understand that Madam Kaag was very careful in choosing her words. For today, if any United Nations official takes the liberty of providing a frank assessment of Israelis' actions, they are immediately inscribed on the Israeli stop list, they are denied entry to the Gaza Strip, and their efforts are obstructed. However, the Security Council has been working in a different paradigm, and it has an obligation, a real obligation, to call a spade a spade. The humanitarian situation in the Palestinian enclave is horrific, and the reason for this is the ongoing Israeli military operation, which Israel has been carrying out without any regard for international humanitarian law or the resolutions and decisions of the United Nations Security Council. Such arrogance emanates from the unconditional support for any of its actions by the United States, which has for nearly a year now been blocking any hint of a substantive reaction from our resolution from the Security Council. And the number of the dead Palestinian civilians as a result of Israeli bombings, armed raids, and ground military operations has exceeded 42,000. At least 100,000 have been wounded. Tens of thousands are missing. Only in the past week, Israeli strikes resulted in the deaths of nearly 100 civilians. There is no justification, and there can be no justification for this, nor is there a justification for the 11 September attack targeting UNRWA school in the Nusayrat refugee camp, which claimed the lives of 18 people, including women and children. The dead include 6 UNRWA staff members. Today, the schools and camps again have been struck. More than 10 people have died again. Beyond the immediate danger of military operations, UN personnel are enduring pressure from the West Jerusalem authorities in various formats. There are frequent detentions, interrogations, movement restrictions, and an information campaign which has been unleashed against UN personnel. Not only does this imperil their lives, but it also threatens the safety of those people who help them. Increasingly, the Israeli side has been targeting violence against UN humanitarian personnel. The Western parties are particularly hypocritical. They play mute when there's a need to provide a frank assessment about what is transpiring with the Palestinians. For if we were talking about any other state, they would vociferously condemn such attacks. And today, instead of, on the eve of 7 October commemoration, instead of discussing the situation in the Strip during high-level week, our Western colleagues are zealously engaged in the PR for the Ukrainian president who has overstayed his term. I hope you understand how hypocritical your words will sound today under such circumstances. If this situation continues, then these developments may result in the cessation of UN operations in Gaza. And in this case, more than 2 million Palestinians will face death. This is not a figure of speech. This is a real prospect, and we cannot allow this to happen. The Council has an obligation to do everything possible to prevent this from happening, and part of the Israeli establishment has clearly demonstrated an interest specifically in this happening. The UN Security Council has the necessary tools for this. What is lacking is the political will in the US and their satellites. Essentially, everything that the United Nations, all that the UN can credit itself with is the ongoing campaign to vaccinate children from polio. We hope that the humanitarian pauses for vaccinations will function. Mr. President, let us not mislead anybody. Given the ongoing military operation of Israel, which has been ongoing for more than 11 months, where the U.S. is a sponsor, the adequate delivery of assistance to the population of the Strip is simply not possible. Humanitarian workers are powerless. They are defenseless in the face of Israeli strikes, and who continue to inhumanely demand that they die during these strikes, whereas the Security Council for nearly a year has been walking in circles and has been unable to compel the Israeli authorities to end its punishing military machine and to stop it. Let us recall that if the UN Security Council resolution on a ceasefire, which we formally have already, if this is not being enforced, then the members of the Security Council can consider measures to ensure its implementation. For the Security Council has the relevant experience and all of the necessary leverage and means, including in the context of a peacekeeping presence in the Middle East. Colleagues, we are all perfectly cognizant of the fact that while intense military operations are underway, it is unrealistic to bank on any significant progress in stabilizing the humanitarian situation on the ground or stepping up humanitarian assistance to the people of Gaza. We need to recognize a simple fact. The problem lies not in the presence or the absence of any mechanism for delivery of humanitarian assistance. The problem lies in the absence of conditions for this due to military operations, where the Israelis are not even making any exceptions for schools or hospitals, nor exceptions provided for UN humanitarian convoys.
Colleagues, notwithstanding the efforts of Senior Coordinator Cog, her UN colleagues, and humanitarians on the ground, the situation in Gaza remains catastrophic. Children are dying, suffering from preventable illnesses, missing schools. Thousands have lost parents, relatives, teachers, and friends, and have the physical and psychological scars to show for it. In recent weeks, there have also been numerous attacks in which UN personnel and humanitarian workers have been injured or killed. We offer our deepest condolences to the families of UN personnel killed and recognize the tragic and unprecedented toll this conflict has taken on the UN family. Colleagues, many of these incidents were preventable. We will continue to raise the need for Israel to facilitate humanitarian operations and protect humanitarian workers and facilities, such as the UNRWA school targeted by the IDF last week in Nasrat. We have also been unequivocal in communicating to Israel that there is no basis, absolutely none, for its forces to be opening fire on clearly marked UN vehicles, as recently occurred on numerous occasions. The IDF is a professional military and knows well how to ensure that incidents such as these do not happen. And so the United States expects the IDF's leadership will implement fundamental changes in the way the IDF operate, including changes to their rules of engagement and steps to fix the obvious shortcomings in how the deconfliction procedures are implemented. At the same time, we continue to see Hamas hiding in and taking over and otherwise using civilian sites to conduct operations and pose an ongoing threat. There's no clear evidence of Hamas's total indifference to Palestinian civilians in Gaza. For their sake and the sake of innocent people on all sides of this conflict, this must stop. All sides to the conflict must adhere to their obligations under international humanitarian law to protect civilians. Colleagues, these recent incidents underscore once again the urgency of reaching a ceasefire with a release of hostages, as this Council called for in Resolution 2735. That is the best way to ensure humanitarians can safely and effectively carry out their life-saving work and massively increase the flow of humanitarian assistance to those who desperately need it. Until such a ceasefire is reached, we continue to work hard toward that end. It is vital that Israel cooperate with the UN to improve humanitarian access and humanitarian conditions generally. Palestinian civilians in Gaza have endured far too much suffering. We're pleased that the first round of polio vaccinations in Gaza has been largely successful, reaching 90% of its target population. And we commend the humanitarian community and all participating UN agencies for their life-saving work. And we thank them for their commitment and their sacrifice. We also encourage the continued cooperation between Israel and the humanitarian community to make this campaign happen. This level of cooperation should be the norm, not the exception. Indeed, the polio campaign is evidence that this can be done, that life-saving assistance can get to those in need without undercutting Israel's security. And so we call on Israel to invest just as much energy into the broader humanitarian effort in Gaza as it did for this first round of this vaccination campaign. Colleagues, 3 weeks from today, we will make a grim milestone, 1 year since Hamas's barbaric October 7th attack. 1 year since 1,200 citizens from Israel and many other countries were massacred, and hundreds more taken into the tunnels beneath Gaza, where many still await in captivity today. They must be released immediately to their families. And 1 year since the civilians of Gaza first began to bear the brunt of a terrible conflict set in motion by Hamas. It bears repeating that it is manifestly in the interest of Israelis, Palestinians, and civilians in every country in the region for this desperation and this devastation to end, for there to be a ceasefire. We continue to work with Egypt and Qatar to find a way forward in the negotiations that will be acceptable to both parties. But as hard as we're going to work on texts and creative formulas, this is ultimately a question of political will. Whether or not leaders on both sides are prepared to recognize that enough is enough, and that the time has come to make some hard choices and some difficult compromises to end this carnage. We urge all council members with influence over Hamas to join others in pressing its leaders to stop stalling, make these compromises, and accept the deal without delay. Lives depend on it. The future depends on it. Colleagues, we remain committed to a two-state solution that will allow Israelis and Palestinians to live side by side in peace and security.